Okay, welcome to the Robert N. Maddox Honor Lecture. Brother Maddox, for whom this honor lecture is named, was an initiate of the Gamma Upsilon chapter at Arkansas. During World War II, he served the United States in the Navy. After the war, he earned his master's degree from Oklahoma and then his doctorate at Oklahoma State. Professionally, he taught chemical engineering at Oklahoma State for 36 years. In 1966, Brother Maddox was elected to serve on the High Council, and in 1972 was elected regent. Besides his leadership contribution to Sigma Nu, perhaps one of the greatest contributions Brother Maddox made to our fraternity was his work in the mid-1970s in revising the ritual. In 1988, he was inducted into the Sigma Nu Hall of Honor, and in that same year, he established the Maddox Honor Lecture series through a generous gift to the Sigma Nu Educational Foundation. Dr. Maddox believed there was an unmet need for our brothers to consider and discuss the principle of honor in their daily lives, as well as at each grand chapter. Brother Maddox envisioned an honor lecture at grand chapter as a means of emphasizing Sigma Nu's commitment to the principle of honor. Dr. Maddox entered the chapter eternal on April 9th, 2008, yet his legacy lives on in the hearts of his family and chapter brothers and through the Maddox Honor Lecture at Grand Chapter. Our keynote speaker this year for the Robert N. Maddox Honor Lecture at the 71st Grand Chapter is a familiar face to many and will be a lasting memory for all getting to hear him. Colonel Keith Gibson serves the Virginia Military Institute as an executive director of the VMI Museum System and is VMI's architectural preservation officer. Colonel Gibson is responsible for the operation and development of the VMI Museum and the Jackson House in Lexington and the Virginia Museum of the Civil War at New Market Battlefield State Historical Park in New Market, Virginia. A native of Richmond, Virginia, Colonel Gibson received his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Virginia Military Institute in 1977. He prepared for a career in public history with graduate work in early American history at James Madison University, as well as museum studies at George Washington University. In 1986, Colonel Gibson was selected as one of 18 museum professionals in the United States to participate in the Seminar for Historical Administrators held at Colonial Williamsburg. He was instrumental in the development of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields National Historic District and Commission Act, passed by the United States Congress in 1996. Colonel Gibson has worked as a consultant on numerous documentaries, television, and feature films, including Summersby, Gettysburg, and the Field of Lost Shoes. He appears frequently as a spokesperson for historic preservation on radio and television and is a published author. Colonel Gibson is a recipient of the 2012 Governor's Star Award for Employee of the Year. He has been a steadfast friend and supporter of Sigma Nu for more than 35 years. In 2018, Colonel Gibson delivered the Maddox Honor Lecture to our 68th Grand Chapter in Jackson Memorial Hall in Lexington at Virginia Military Institute. His perspective and insight are invaluable to understanding the factors that gave rise to the Legion of Honor. 2018 was our 150th anniversary Grand Chapter, with our anniversary coming up 6 months later. And we held Grand Chapter in Washington, D.C., and we took a day-long pilgrimage to Lexington and back. And it was at that time that Colonel Gibson delivered the Maddox Lecture on the campus of VMI. In addition to serving as our honor lecturer today, in 2018, Colonel Gibson served on a committee to study our fraternity's historic preservation needs. That's what Regent Gilman spoke of yesterday. and in 29 made it possible for the founding of our fraternity to be reenacted on the parade ground of VMI. In recognition of Colonel Gibson's extensive service to our fraternity, he was the 2019 recipient of the Regent's Medallion of Merit Award, which you just saw presented to Chris Graham. That's the only distinction of honor bestowed by the High Council. 5 years ago, Colonel Gibson became a fellow knight in our Legion of Honor, having been initiated as a non-matriculate by the MU chapter at the University of Georgia during the 2020 College of Chapters. Since 2020, Colonel Gibson has served as Sigma Nu's Grand Historian. He is presently a member of the McCulley Commission of Sigma Nu, which is tasked with developing plans, as you learned yesterday, from the building of our new Robert A. McCulley Memorial Archives facility, renovation of our public display areas, and enhancement of the preservation and application of our rich history. Keith and his wife, Pat, by whose attendance we are honored this week, reside in Rockbridge County, the home of Lexington and VMI. There is no person better to talk with us about the place of our founding during the Reconstruction period of the late 1860s. It is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce to you our Sigma Nu brother, Sigma Nu Grand Historian, and the 71st Grand Chapter Robert N. Maddox Honor Lecture keynote speaker, Colonel Keith Gibson. I better get this salute right.
Brother Regent. Keith Gibson. I'm pleased to say, MU, Georgia, 2892. Thank you, Regent Gaston, members of the High Council, collegians, alumni, friends, good morning. I very much appreciate this opportunity to share with you a story of our founding. And I know you are all familiar with our founding because one of the strengths of Sigma Nu is that it recognizes the incredible role in character development to acknowledge heritage, legacy, tradition. But this story is important to us today. How many of you, by the way, have been to Lexington? Have you visited the headquarters? Just a show of hands. That is impressive. I was hoping most of you would raise your hands. And I hope that all of you have the opportunity to do so during your collegiate and alumni years. But when you do travel to Lexington, you'll be greeted by a sleepy college town. You'll be hard-pressed to find a building on Main Street that was built after 1850. It'll be familiar street schemes that would be the founders today would still recognize. The local architectural review board makes sure that just the right color paint is used on the storefronts and that modernity is pushed well off onto the out of sight. It's one of those rare places, in fact, that just feels good. It feels safe, comfortable. It's a place where people smile and say hello, leaving you to think, do I know them? Well, it doesn't really matter whether you know them or not. You just smile and say hello back as you pass them on the sidewalk. It has just the right balance of Southern charm and craft beer brewery. Well, maybe a few more craft beer breweries are in our future, but it's a good place to be. It's a good balance. In a very defining way, Lexington has always been a college town, as it remains. It's the home of two of the oldest, and I will say prestigious colleges in America, Washington and Lee University, and Virginia Military Institute. It is the birthplace of three of the nation's oldest and most significant fraternities. Kappa Alpha, founded at Washington and Lee, then Washington and Lee called Washington College. Alpha Tau Omega and Sigma Nu, of course, being founded in the neighboring community of VMI. But that's not really the Lexington that I want to tell you about today. The Lexington that you will experience doing a visit or have experienced will be different from that place that was the birthplace of this organization. I want to tell you about that Lexington. Now, Lexington has always been the seat of government for the agriculturally rich county of Rockbridge, which takes its name, by the way, from the great natural bridge that's seen there. Maybe you had a chance to visit when you were in Lexington. But Herman Melville, it's important to note, to show you how important Natural Bridge is, when he wrote his great novel, Moby Dick, and he wanted to explain to his reader, give a vision of what this great whale appeared as the whale, he says, breached the ocean. It was as if his back was arching like the great natural bridge of Virginia. And Melville knew that his readers would immediately understand exactly what that looked like. It was well known in early America. It represented the might, the majesty, the potential of this new nation, which is now embarking on its celebration of 250 years. The village straddles the Great Valley Road. Interstate 81 is basically that place today. And it took travelers to the west and to the south, to new lands, new opportunities. Many of those travelers, in fact, would not stop until they got to about where we are today in Texas. Sam Houston, it's been pointed out, was from Rockbridge County. Stephen Austin was from further in the valley of Virginia. There was a navigable river that connected all of that potential to the rich East Coast markets. Now, in 1860, these assets assured a comfortable, stable home for some 2,100 residents, 1,400 of whom were white, 700 were black, freed and enslaved. 5 years later, one could hardly recognize, in fact, barely remember that Lexington. Surrounding farms sat idle, no livestock, no crops. Fences had been converted to firewood by advancing federal troops. Homes were scarred with artillery rounds. Empty storefronts lined Main Street. The State Military College, VMI, sat atop a ridgeline north of town, a charred, burned out ruin. Washington College had been ransacked. That's what 4 years of civil war, civil strife, disunion can do. One day after the event, Lexington received word that the war had ended with the surrender of General Robert E. Lee just 60 miles to the southeast of Lexington, just beyond the Blue Ridge Mountains in Appomattox, as you would remember. What the South had called their war for independence, and the North, the war for a more perfect union, had left Lexington, well, in fact, all of Virginia, a shattered economy, social chaos, 33,000 war dead. There would be no federal aid, no Marshall Plan. You might recall the Marshall Plan of World War II, George Catlett Marshall, VMI, class of 1901, being the initiative of that great humanitarian effort. There would be no United Nations intervention. In the immediate post-war period, in fact, Virginia was a state without a country. Now, imagine being at that transitional moment of life as a late teen when virtually every social norm that you knew up to that point was upended. The world you expected to inherit upon college graduation had become a very different place from the one that would await you. And that is the world that awaited young men like Otis Glazebrook, Erskine Ross, William Walsh, James Riley, Greenfield Quarles, James Wood, William Scott, James Hopkins, Alfred Marshall. How would those men contribute to this new thing, this more perfect union? Now, it would be in that Lexington, the Lexington of violent, uncertain times, where these men would make decisions and commitments which would ring out across our nation's history. In fact, find its presence in this very room this morning. The first months of Reconstruction, the nation, at least in Lexington, can be summed up as dystopian. Politically, socially, confusing, chaotic. It was a confused place. The commitment to reopen the two colleges brought some relief, needed capital and employment. Washington College convinced the vanquished leader of the Southern forces to be its next president. And General Lee arrived and assumed his duties in the fall of 1865. These two vital demonstrations of commitment to the future through education of its young men at that time resulted in these young men making their way to Lexington from around the South. Many of these new rivals had fought under Lee. They were just old enough to do so in that last year of the war. But now they looked to him as a peacetime mentor for guidance. Lee quickly set about implementing a plan of academic reconstruction for his new employer. He sought to modernize the curriculum, creating a practical education for the practical needs of a war-torn Virginia. Many old rules were dropped, and social life was relaxed. And when one of the new students asked President Lee, where's the rule book? I need to become familiar with it. Lee responded in a way that showed his intentions. He said, we have but one rule, and that is that every student must be a gentleman. How did Lee define being a gentleman, and why was that so important? Lee addressed the most immediate issues facing his students in his definition, and that is of this new social order. The manner in which an individual enjoys certain advantages over others, said Lee, is a test of true gentlemanliness. The power which the strong have over the weak, the employer over the employed, the educated over the unlettered, the experienced over the confiding, even the clever over the silly, the forbearing of all of this power or authority that individual might have shows the gentleman in plain light. The gentleman does not needlessly remind an offender of a wrong he may have committed against him. He can not only forgive, he can forget, and he strives for that nobleness of self and mildness of character, which imparts sufficient strength to let the past be the past. That is what Lee said. Before the summer of 1865 was over, VMI began to rise from the ashes. And like Lee, VMI superintendent, that's what we call our president, Francis Smith, placed the same emphasis on honorable conduct and expected it of all of his cadets. The prerequisite of being a gentleman was to be a man of honor. Without one, the other cannot exist. To be a man of honor is to be a gentleman. Without one, the other cannot exist. Smith was determined to fill his engineering classrooms with men seeking a place in the rebuilding of America, this new America. Even if it did mean that they would be doing their military procedures without firearms or proper uniforms, the work had to begin. It had to be done. The significant influx of young college-aged men into the struggling village, however, brought its own issues, its own problems. The VMI barracks was not yet inhabitable, so the cadets had to find lodging in town. Washington College students were left to find rooms and board off campus as well. And the resulting housing shortage strained the town and gown relationship. There was no shortage, however, of drinking establishments even at that time. Ready whiskey, limited law enforcement, access to personal firearms, and testosterone-charged 20-year-olds was a volatile mixture. It was what Shakespeare might have referred to as a cauldron of toil and trouble. The sidewalks of Lexington, where today you will be greeted with a smile and a good morning, whether or not you know the person, at that time, they were frequent venues for violence. Newly freed blacks and often indignant whites challenged each other for the right-of-way, pushing, jeering, shoving. Often serious escalations ensued, leading even to injury and, on rare occasion, death. Sexual harassment of black women was so commonplace that it was hardly even caught the attention of law enforcement. Lexington was chosen to be the regional headquarters of the Freedmen's Bureau, that federal agency, you might recall, established to assist the recently emancipated in their new lives of freedom and hope. The American Missionary Association worked with the Freedmen's Bureau to open schools in Lexington for the black community, young, old, of all ages. The arrival of Northern teachers and Northern administrators was not welcomed. In fact, it was resented by many of the town's white population. Now, up until this time, Reconstruction was administered by President Andrew Johnson, who was sympathetic to the sentiments of Southern whites. Congressional elections brought the radical wing of the Republican Party. I know this history, and I apologize for it, but it sets the stage for our founders. This is their daily headlines. The Republican Party that came in 1867 created this thing called Military District Number 1. Virginia was still a state without a nation, but now it had a new designation, Military District Number 1. A new phase of Reconstruction began. Local officials were replaced with military officers acting as provost guards. Race relations became even more strained. College students and cadets were often active participants, even instigators of violence in the streets. In 1867, General John Schofield, the commanding general of Military District Number 1, called for a state convention to establish the groundworks to have Virginia come back into the Union. A fellow named Underwood, Judge Underwood, was given the responsibilities to convene that convention. Now, the judge was a self-proclaimed white supremacist himself, and he sought to thread the needle by assuring the continuance of this supremacy while fulfilling the federal requirements for Virginia to re-enter the Union, most significantly the ratification of the 14th and 15th Amendments. These were the headlines of Quarles and Raleigh. The new Constitution was debated, written, rewritten, debated some more, discussed, and finally voted upon. It must have sounded like an early Sigma Nu Grand Convention at times. But finally, all of the debate was over, and a vote was taken. And in 1870, General Ulysses Grant welcomed Virginia back into the Union. Back into the Union. A more perfect Union than the one they had left? Perhaps, but not yet perfect. These 9 young men, whose names I mentioned earlier, were not just randomly picked from the old student registers of Washington College or VMI. I hope that some of the names are familiar to you. Ross finished VMI in 1865. Glazebrook and Marshall graduated the year later, and while they were at VMI, had found Alpha Tau Omega. Wood, Walsh, and Scott attended Washington College between 1865 and 1871, and are responsible for Kappa Alpha as we know it today. But those other guys, Riley, Hopkins, and Quarles, they accepted their diploma from VMI in 1870. They were what we refer to in the VMI parlance as brother rats, classmates. A year earlier, on a crisp darkness illuminated by the moon of a fall night, these three men met on the VMI parade ground and pledged themselves to a new group that would change the course of their lives and so many others. And they called it, and I just find this so poignant, they called it the Legion of Honor. No question about it. It's very simple. We are the Legion of Honor. These 9 men collectively, most of whom were veterans of the war, by the way, saw the firsthand a need, an imperative, really, to somehow positively affect the world for which they would now be responsible. I'm reminding myself a world different but similar in ways very soon for which you will be responsible. What contribution would those men make towards perfecting the Union? Fraternity was the tool they adopted to help mold the future. I contend, in fact, that the shocking reality of Reconstruction Lexington was the key to the maturing of those young men. The certainty of their future must not look like the presence, and that compelled them to action. Otis Allen Glazebrook, one of those VMI fellows I mentioned, class of 1866, reflected on his purpose and the words that became the creed for Alpha Tau Omega. And he said, "To bind men together in a brotherhood based upon eternal and immutable principles, with a bond as strong as right itself and lasting as humanity itself, to know no north, south, east, west, but to know man as man, to teach that true men the world over, not just in America, but the world, should stand together united for supremacy of good over evil, to teach not politics, but morals, to foster not partisanship, but the recognition of true merit wherever it is found, to have no narrower limit within which to work together for the elevation of mankind than the entire world." Wood, Walsh, and Scott found their inspiration in the presence of the character of Robert E. Lee, who realized the future of Virginia and the nation rested with the educational preparedness of this next generation. Thank God there's always a next generation. That's you. The creation of Kappa Alpha is their proud legacy to that commitment. Now, it's been stated many times in our history, even this week, that James Hopkins sought to address what he witnessed as undue hazing of new cadets, and he determined to eliminate it from the cadet experience. That noble objective, I agree, is accurate, at least partially. I think there's more to it. It was the world around him, collectively. I think the catalyst of Hopkins' actions were stimulated by the lack of civility, the violence, the inhumanity which surrounded him in that Reconstruction era Lexington. Hopkins, Riley, and Quarles realized that such a society would not survive. They found a way forward inspired by Christian tenets and a life committed to honorable conduct. Their creed the same one that you heard, that you participated in just moments ago, their creed was very simply stated. It will be based on love, honor, truth. They created what they referred to as this thing, this Legion of Honor. And we call it Sigma Nu. But we don't forget that knighthood, that pledge, that commitment that you have made to those simple 3 little words. Sigma Nu was born, my point being, Sigma Nu was born in a world of violence, change, and uncertainty. The founders sought a way forward by establishing a bedrock of honorable character and banding together with like-minded young men from across the nation. I am pleased to say that the Lexington you have visited or you will visit in the future is not the Lexington of Hopkins, Riley, and Quarles, and to some degree, thanks for their efforts. Your founders rejected incivility, violence, and inhumanity, and began to change their world. Their work, it is clear to us today, when we read our own headlines, was not completed. Perhaps it will never be a perfect union, but it will always be a more perfect union thanks to the commitment of knights that are willing to take up that effort. There's plenty of work left for you and left for me. Out of that dark period of Reconstruction arose this triad, Kappa Alpha, Alpha Tau Omega, Sigma Nu. Their mission was nothing less than fulfilling the aspirations found in the preamble of the United States Constitution to form a more perfect union. And that, I submit, remains the collective work of those other fraternities, but specifically this one, the Legion of Honor, to continue that march towards the more perfect union. Thank you.